Boss fights are supposed to be the best part of a game. Why else did so many games end with them? So why are almost all of them shit? Seriously, how in the actual fuck am I even supposed to hit this motherfucker? He doesn't even have downtime! And now I'm outside of the fucking map! Isn't that great?
So how did this happen? Well, considering this game is somehow reviewed better than the original, I might be in the minority. But I fucking hate this game's boss fights. And by extension, the game itself. And the root of that is, well, in part, because they removed one of the best platform mechanics of all time, but also because these boss fights are actually fucking dreadful. Also, the level design is a bit worse, but I digress. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a worse game than Ori and the Blind Forest, to me. And it can most easily be explained by what Ori, at least to me, has always been. A Metroidvania focused on platforming, which meant it had light combat. Sure, but nothing major. However, the Will of the Wisp does not see it this way. Instead, it focuses on combat, which even in this game is undercooked as hell. And this is where we get the first major problem with its boss fights. They are combat focused in a game that's mechanics work best as a platformer. And that's the first takeaway. Make your bosses use the primary mechanic of the game. You ever wonder why no one likes water levels in games? It's because they are using mechanics that aren't essential to the game. In other words, you can make swimming fun. Ever open up Twitch? But is it worth refining those mechanics and tuning them to work just as well as the core game's mechanics? Probably not. Because realistically, the time put into Mario running on the overworld is, and definitely should be, hundreds of times longer than the time put into Mario's swimming. And that's why it's not fun. The reason water levels are in games is to break up the levels of the game and have something be different. Now, whether or not that works well in a modern game is a discussion for another time, and definitely another place.
Oh, that's a funny way to write Club Penguin. Shit, my bad.
However, how does this apply to boss battles? Well, for starters, don't make your boss fight in the fucking water. A boss fight should shine a light on the game's strengths, not on its weaknesses. The reason the boss fights are so bad in this game is because they focus on your attacks and not on the platforming, which is the best and most fleshed out mechanic in the game. I enjoyed the brutally tight platforming challenges that were the bosses of Blind Forest. It was legitimately my favorite takeaway from the game and what I was most looking forward to in its sequel.
Damn, I should really know better by now. I play Overwatch.
Another problem with many of the boss fights in this game, and many others, is that they just aren't fair. Not only are they requiring a player to complete a skill check on a skill the game doesn't normally develop, but also the game doesn't give clear openings. A good benchmark for a good boss fight is whether or not a player who is doing really well in the game can complete it on their first try or two, without having to memorize patterns or to do other things that aren't built up during the gameplay. And a large part of this is giving clear openings. Of course, not all games are the same. If you are trying to make a game more similar to Dark Souls, where the challenge is primarily bosses and learning patterns, yes, the bosses should be harder, and they should maybe even require a level of pattern recognition. But those are skills that are built up during the game. If I am playing a Metroidvania, I do not want to learn which of this frog's fucking 7 attacks I can hit him during and which ones I can't. Especially when they all look the fucking same. I just want to continue platforming challenges. And I am sure some people enjoy that. However, that doesn't change that these boss fights are inherently less similar to the game's normal gameplay, and therefore less valid as a test of the player's skill. And whether or not it's more fun will depend on the player, but the game design itself is failing here. Now, how do we fix those problems before we move on to more common mistakes? To solve the issues of games checking a skill the player hasn't developed, we should change how we think about boss design.
Yeah, just crumple up decades worth of boss design.
But we should first consider what type of game we're making. If it's a platformer, maybe don't have the player grind down the boss's health bar and instead focus on dodging attacks or having the player escape the boss instead of defeating them outright in combat. On the opposite end, in games like Zelda or Dark Souls, maybe it should be a more combat-heavy experience, with you taking them head on in a sword duel with the climactic ending. Or for a movement shooter, instead of the bosses just being giant sacks of hit points and you have to focus them down, instead focus on the player's movement and reaching the boss before having a quick duel. Or perhaps even give that enemy more movement. Good boss fights make use of the game's mechanics. The best example of this might just be Portal. GLaDOS is quite possibly the best puzzle game boss of all time. The fight relies on you making use of portals to align shots to take down GLaDOS, all pre-established mechanics, as well as forcing the player to move around quickly using portals. Everything in this boss fight was taught already, and it merely becomes an effort of using what you learned in an environment that it wasn't originally taught in. Let's continue breaking down what makes both GLaDOS fights in Portal 1 and 2 so good. Everything about them is foreshadowed, along with the game making beautiful use of combining information in a way that's easy to digest while still posing unique questions of what the player needs to do at that exact moment. It also handles writing extremely well, climaxing the story in a fulfilling way. We learn about the personality cores previously, and as we rip them away, we see massive mood swings in how GLaDOS acts, giving payoff to the seeds that the game set much earlier. Another great and memorable boss fight is almost any within Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door, but I think most players will remember especially the first boss, Hooktail. Not only is she well foreshadowed throughout the entire start of the chapter, and telegraphed to be a problem as well as being built up through the town's fear, she also creates an impact in two really unique ways that should act as a blueprint for the next major step in a good boss design. If you're going to introduce something new during a boss fight, which you should, only mutate the game. Don't change the core of the game. No, please, for the love of God, do not do that. In the middle of this battle, we see Hooktail eat the audience, regaining HP and moving the battle to the foreground. It's a really unique mechanic that is only seen in this battle. It does well to make the boss feel unique and still completes the job of breaking up gameplay, while still not giving the boss directly more hit points or just becoming a stronger version of normal enemies. It does well to make the boss unique and still completes the job of breaking up gameplay, while still making the boss last longer without just making it have a massive base hit points, or just being a stronger version of normal enemies. And another beautiful thing it does is removes the audience mechanic, which helps simplify the fight for the new players who are still trying to figure out the game. Another way they make this boss unique is the dialogue and surrounding circumstance. I'm pretty sure this line has had more discussion about it in the last 15 years than I've said fuck in the last 7 minutes. A very scientific measure. And I don't think I'll ever forget just how fucking funny Coop's father coming out of Hooktail was for the first time.
Wait, how fucking horny was the person making this boss fight?
Moving swiftly on from memorable boss fights for perhaps the wrong reasons, and moving on to boss fights that are remembered for the real wrong reasons. In my experience, the worst boss fights fall into 3 camps. The ones where it's a fucking water level, the ones where it requires a fucking frame perfect input, and the ones where you don't actually ever have any clear telegraphed openings. Let's first cover that last one. I'm going to not shit on Will-O-the-Wisp for once.
I fucking hate those wisps.
Even though most of its boss fights do suffer from this. I'm instead going to shit on...
Oh, Skyward Sword, everyone's 3rd favorite Zelda game on the Wii.
Despite being the 3rd best-selling Zelda game on the Wii, likely because it was one of the most generic cookie-cutter feeling Zeldas of all time, has some bad boss fights. For example, Girham. While honestly probably being one of the more interesting antagonists the series has had, somehow gets outshined by the real devil of this game, Fi. Fuck Fi. Regardless, Girham has many boss fights where by design the impact is basically 0. And you have to ask Fi for how to defeat him, which is just fucking dumb. If I had to press the help I'm a dumbass button, I want it to make me feel like I'm a dumbass for not understanding. But instead, even when I ask for advice, I still don't understand and I still have to look it up. Also, side note, that makes every single boss fight in this game 10 times worse. If you die, all of the resources you used in your last boss fight attempt are already used and you have to reacquire them.
Why in the actual fuck do games think it's a good idea to punish a player for being bad by making the game more difficult?
Did that boss fight feel unfair?
Yes!
Well, now do it on hard mode, fuckhead! Another prime example of this is the fucking annoying frog in Will-O-the-Wisp. Okay, I'll go back to Skyward Sword. Jeez. This boss, this ground-on looking motherfucker, made me Alt F4 the game more times than I would really like to admit.
And yes, I said Alt F4'd.
For fuck's sakes. We lost a real one. But my point is, this boss fits the same criteria. No clear openings, and if the openings were there, they're so short and unable to be really exploited. Not to mention, repeated multiple times throughout the game. I don't really understand how it's that difficult to just not make your bosses continuously attack. And I say this as someone who really enjoys difficult games, but getting stomped because the enemy decided that it's a bad time for me to attack them by some utterly arbitrary and random mechanic that I just can't discern, it's just not fun, nor is it fair. Now, onto the really fun section. It's a boss in the fucking water. Remember that whole explanation on why water mechanics suck? Now just add on mediocre boss design and you get the problem with water bosses. By default, if you're fighting a boss in water, it is made worse. The controls aren't as tight, the combat isn't nearly as refined. A key thing to remember is that bosses are supposed to be highlights of the games and not low points like these are. And to solve this, we simply just don't do this. Just don't do chemistry. It's very simple. Just don't take the class. And another problematic boss trope is frame-perfect bosses. These I am admittedly a little less hard and fast on. It might just be a skill issue on this one. If it fits the game, they can make sense. However, I would be lying if I didn't say the worst boss fight in Breath of the Wild was easily Thunderblight. He is just unfun because he requires you to hit perfect guards. And maybe it's because on my first playthrough, I never finished a tutorial. And maybe because on both my playthroughs, I've played on a GameCube controller without shield being binded. But perfect guards did not come naturally to me. Boy, I wonder why. But it just wasn't fun. And even when I hit all of them, because I didn't have enough equipment going into the fight, all my swords broke and I still couldn't finish the boss. So I had to grind more weapons. That might have been because I never used Korok seeds on either of my playthroughs.
Wow, that really sounds like a me issue now I think about it.
However, here is possibly the most important thing, because I'm sure many people are just thinking skill issue, get good, or just acquire more items. What's wrong with playing the game more? And to that I say, I don't really think it's a skill issue, but also I don't enjoy 100% in games. And I don't even really enjoy doing side quests. So if grinding those isn't fun to me, then why should I do them? And that's where I get to my main problem. A lot of games, and this is where my nature as a player is shown, expect you to complete side quests. And because of that, Ori and the Will of Wisps is a great game. If you like to 100% games, or if you like to do a lot of side quests in those games. In fact, from what I've heard from my friends, the game is great if you do the side quests. Like they did. If you like to move on and complete the main objectives as quickly as possible, the game wasn't balanced for it. And because of that, and poor design on the bosses, you can feel just how unfair they are. Because they were made to strike down these titans, and not these 5 HP little bitches. I see posts saying that the bosses were really easy, but then I realized the difference between me and them is I'm playing them immediately as soon as they're available. And because that's what I find enjoyable as a player, I'm much more affected by bad boss design than players who 100% the game and can just power through. And yeah, it makes sense to be more powerful the more you do. And yeah, it should be a little more difficult to complete the boss fight if you didn't do every side quest. But the difficulty should not be derived from because it just does a million damage. The difficulty should be derived from not having the mechanics trained. So to make a boss enjoyable, it needs to be fun and ideally difficult for players who both 100%ed the game and players who did the minimum. And while you could just scale the numbers, the better solution is right in front of you.
It is!
Games like Portal and Thousand Year Door have already found the answer. Either make the challenges not just about lowering the health bar to 0 and surviving through, because any cow off the street can do that with the right gear, but instead make it a test of the game's specific skills. Skills that are trained during the game. If it's a puzzle game, puzzle mechanics. If it's a combat game, make it a test of your swordsmanship. Like the beautiful boss fights of Twilight Princess.
Still one of, if not the best boss fights of all time. Just saying.
Or in Thousand Year Door, where no matter what character is playing, you can beat the game without level ups. If you are extremely good at super guards, a near frame perfect trick, you can take 0 damage. But it's pretty easy to learn just by judging the timer on each new encounter. Not to mention, it's not necessary to beat the game using it. You can use mechanics and work around even that as being a requirement. Mechanics that judge a player's skill, reaction, and judgment will always be better than ones that test memorization in a player's character level, because those reward grinding and wasting your time instead of raw skill, while doing extras should maybe even make it a little easier, or just have, difficulty options, but or in the Wisps doesn't let you change them even though the original could! Not salty. A great way to do this, as well as increase the player's presence of enemies, is to create anticipation. When a player is able to tell an attack is coming, they know it's not an opening, and they know they're going to be attacked, which makes it so they can make a fair judgment to back away. As the game gets later, or to increase the difficulty if it fits your game, you can make these warnings shorter. The important thing is to give your player time to react, as well as distinguish separate attacks. Additionally, a good boss has impact and weight to their attacks, even if it doesn't reflect in the numbers. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that you feel the impact. Everything in games is psychological, and having the boss feel heavy and impactful, or fast and responsive, can be key to having them feel good to fight, as well as being unique encounters. However, the most important part is to make sure the player themselves is impactful against the boss. Mostly because if you don't give the player impact, you're basically playing Overwatch.
And no one wants that.